Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first of what we hope are many gatherings of TrinityU. We have known for a long time that what we teach here at Trinity Classical Academy is special and very unique. As the only full-time K-12 classical Christian school in Los Angeles County, we offer an incredible education that is hard to get anywhere else. And what we want to share with you, the parents and friends of Trinity in Santa Clarita Valley. This is our first night, and we hope that over time, this idea of TrinityU will grow not only for our families in our own community to want to attend, but reaching outward. And you have to tell me your last name again? Dr. Hansen, you are our first TrinityU guest, not from our community. So welcome. Hi, Frasers, come on in. Our speaker tonight is also the director of TrinityU, Shea Ramquist. Shea is a native of Tokyo, Japan. He earned his BA in Humanities after studying at Biola University, the university's Torrey Honors Institute, and Oxford University. After working in national and international sales for an online education company, Shea did graduate studies in American intellectual history at the University of Notre Dame. Now Shea has been with us here at Trinity for 3 years, teaching history and rhetoric. As soon as Shea got here, he demonstrated his excellence as a teacher. I know from working with him as being a part of our faculty, that not only is he excellent in his craft, he has become a favorite among our students. Shea also is involved in the senior thesis class with Mr. Weichbrodt and Dr. Selby. Shea has really strengthened our already strong rhetoric program. I'm very excited that he has taken the initiative to launch TrinityU. So you are in for a real treat tonight as Shea offers his talk on Aristotle's Ethos, how to win hard conversations at work, church, and home. This talk is taken from his 11th grade honors rhetoric class. Please welcome Shea Ramquist.
Let me begin with a quick word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this evening. We thank you that we can gather here and that we can learn to use the gift of speech that you have given us better and well for the purposes of healing this broken world. We pray that we would go forth from this place tonight encouraged and inspired to share your word with others well and winsomely. And I ask that you would allow me to say the words that need to be said to us tonight. We pray this all in the name of Jesus. Amen. I'd like to begin tonight with a story about one of my rhetorical heroes. In 1969, Fred Rogers was a slim, friendly, and relatively unknown 41-year-old with a degree in piano composition, an ordination as a Presbyterian pastor, and a skill in puppetry and a penchant for zip-up cardigans. His show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, had only been airing nationally for 1 year on the fledgling, publicly funded PBS network when he received devastating news. The federal government planned to slash PBS's budget from $20 million down to $10 million, meaning Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood would be shut down and shuttered. To save his show, Rogers had to fly to Washington, D.C. and testify before Senator John Pastore, the fearsome chair of the Senate Communications Subcommittee. Now, Pastore was a former trial lawyer. The first Italian-American elected senator, he was tough-talking, quick-witted, and had a razor-sharp mouth. And as the hearing started, Pastore was gruff and impatient. But that quickly changed as Rogers began talking in that wonderful, calming voice of his. And just 3 minutes in, the whole dynamic had changed. I'd like to show you guys a little clip of what things looked like 3 minutes in.
We made 100 programs for EEN, the Eastern Educational Network, and then when the money ran out, people in Boston and Pittsburgh and Chicago all came to the fore and said, we've got to have more of this neighborhood expression of care. And this is what I give. I give an expression of care every day to each child to help him realize that he is unique. I end the program by saying, you've made this day a special day by just your being you. There's no person in the whole world like you, and I like you just the way you are. And I feel that if we in public television can only make it clear that feelings are mentionable and manageable, we will have done a great service for mental health. I think that it's much more dramatic that two men could be working out their feelings of anger, much more dramatic than showing something of gunfire. I'm constantly concerned about what our children are seeing. And for 15 years, I have tried in this country and Canada to present what I feel is a meaningful expression of care.
Do you narrate it?
I'm the host, yes, and I do all the puppets, and I write all the music, and I write all the scripts.
Well, I'm supposed to be a pretty tough guy, and this is the first time I've had goosebumps for the last 2 days. I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful. Looks like you just earned the $20 million.
Okay, there's a little cut there. Rogers would keep on going for another minute or two until Pastore delivered that wonderful news that he'd earned the $20 million. 5 little minutes. Pastore goes from gruff, impatient, to utterly charmed and in the palm of Rogers' hand. In fact, Pastore was better than his word. He actually increased the funding to $22 million based on Rogers' hearing. How did he do that? How did Fred Rogers, in just 5 minutes, save a television network, earn $10 million, and ensure the future of one of the most beloved children's television shows of all time? Well, kind, saintly Fred Rogers was actually a master rhetorician. And in particular, he was an expert in what Aristotle called ethos. So tonight, I would like to propose 3 questions. First of all, what is rhetoric, and why does it matter to us so deeply right now in 2018? Second, who is Aristotle, and why should we listen to his rhetorical theories? And then, what is ethos, and how will it help you win those hard conversations at work, church, and home? And finally, I'd like to end with some practical tools that you can take home with you tonight to help you start practicing the Aristotelian art of rhetoric. So let's begin with the first question. What is rhetoric, and why does it matter so much? Well, I have to admit here at the start that rhetoric doesn't exactly have the best reputation these days. You hear a lot about empty rhetoric, or that something is just rhetoric. Maybe rhetoric is hot air at its best, and its worst, it's probably just manipulation. Well, despite its less than stellar reputation, rhetoric has a long and illustrious history. It's often referred to as the art of persuasion. It's the ability to communicate a message, to change minds, and to cause action. It's the art of leadership, the core skill of politicians, lawyers, generals, and CEOs. And rhetoric is all around us. It's in speeches, in politics, and in the courts of law. It's in academic essays written by high schoolers, college students, and professors. But it's also in magazines and books, in TV and movies. It's in newspaper articles and op-eds. It's absolutely in commercials. In fact, last night was the rhetorical highlight of the year for me as I poured through all those commercials. Every single one a rhetorical masterpiece intended to move you, to get you to buy products. And it's with us in every moment of our day in things like emails, Facebook posts, text messages, and just everyday conversations. We are awash in rhetoric from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep. So why does rhetoric matter? Well, it's incredibly powerful. It plays with our emotions. It talks us into decisions. It makes us buy stuff. It's been called the hidden software that drives our social lives. The ancient Greeks and Romans knew well the power of words used persuasively, and they trained all their future leaders in the art. Alexander the Great knew it. Julius Caesar knew it. Shakespeare was trained rhetorically in a classical school and used rhetoric to write all his plays. Our founding fathers like Washington, Jefferson, Adams, Madison were all expert rhetoricians and used their rhetorical skill to write documents like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And it's been said that if you don't know rhetoric, you can't see how others are using it on you. If you don't know the tools of persuasion, you can't tell how politicians, salespeople, and advertisers are using those tools to manipulate you. To paraphrase a famous quote from C.S. Lewis, good rhetoric must exist, if no other reason than because bad rhetoric needs to be answered. And I have to admit, throughout history, bad rhetoric has caused immense pain in the world. It's been used to launch bombs, topple governments, install dictators, and incite genocide. But good rhetoric has been used to win battles, defend the vulnerable, destroy slavery, inspire imaginations, and express humanity's deepest truths. Rhetoric can be used to get people to like you, trust you. It can be used to bring people together and inspire them. But we're losing the ability to speak to each other today, especially about the things that we care about most, like education, religion, and politics. We meet someone from an opposing viewpoint, we start a conversation, and almost immediately things get heated. We rely on our partisan talking points, we don't listen, and when those talking points don't work, we simply yell louder. And increasingly in our society, we turn to violence, as happened in Charlottesville earlier this year. Civil discourse is at an all-time low in America. And that's bad news for a democratic nation that requires healthy debate and compromise for its government to function. Now, I would like to argue to you that yelling is not a result of too much rhetoric. It's actually the result of not enough good argument. We've lost the art of disagreeing well. We've lost the art of healthy rhetoric, and we have to recover it. And using rhetoric is of special importance to Christians. St. Augustine, the towering theologian of the 4th century, argued that Christians have a special responsibility to know rhetoric. In his book on Christian teaching, he argued that since both Christians and non-Christians have access to rhetoric, it's vital that Christians not neglect the art. As he wrote, if Christians neglect the art of rhetoric, non-Christians would present falsehoods and descriptions that are clear, concise, and convincing, while we would present the truth in such a way as to bore our listeners, cloud their understandings, and stifle their desire to believe. That they would attack the truth and advocate falsehoods with phony arguments, while we would be too feeble either to defend what is true or refute what is false. And that they, pushing and propelling their listeners' minds towards error, would speak so as to inspire fear, sadness, or delight, and issue passionate appeals, while we, in the name of truth, can only idle along, sounding dull and disinterested. Well, here at Trinity, because we believe rhetoric is so important for all these reasons, we teach an awful lot of it to our students. Starting in the 4th grade and continuing all the way up through senior year, we immerse our students in the progymnosmata, which is the carefully sequenced writing and rhetoric program that was developed to train the greatest rhetoricians of ancient Greece, the greatest rhetoricians of the medieval universities, and the greatest rhetoricians of the Renaissance. That program culminates in our senior thesis, in which every senior at our school writes a 20 to 40-page, heavily researched, persuasive paper, which they then turn and boil down into a 10-minute speech, which they deliver to a public audience without notes. And because we teach our students so much rhetoric, I think it's especially important for Trinity parents to learn a little bit themselves. You don't want to be outgunned by your rhetorically nimble students. You want to make it a fair fight. So, if rhetoric matters, how do we learn it? To learn it, we need to turn to Aristotle. So, who is Aristotle, and why does he matter so much to the art of rhetoric? Well, Aristotle was born in 384 BC during the height of the golden age of Greece. Socrates, perhaps the most famous philosopher in the Western philosophical tradition, trained Plato, and Plato trained Aristotle. In fact, Aristotle was probably Plato's star student. Aristotle was a beautiful writer. He wrote over 200 works, and unfortunately, due to the ravages of time and history, only 31 of them have lasted to today. But from those books, we know that he was a brilliant, systematic thinker. He was clearly one of the greatest geniuses in history, and his inventions were entire new ways of thinking about the world. Listen to the list of subjects that he was the very first to ever define and explain. He was the first to define and explain logic, theater, science, comedy, politics, ethics, and of course, rhetoric. For nearly 2,000 years, Aristotle reigned among scholars simply as the philosopher or the thinker. And the 16th century Enlightenment kicked off with figures like Galileo, Newton, and Descartes asking the question, what if Aristotle was actually wrong, maybe once? Throughout history, leaders have drawn on Aristotelian theory over and over to form their governments, including our nation. Our founding fathers based much of the Constitution on Aristotelian political thought. While Aristotle's influence may have waned in science, he's still the dominant theorist in logic, theater, ethics, and rhetoric. And so we turn to Aristotle's definition of rhetoric. He most famously said, "Rhetoric may be defined as the art of observing, in any given case, the available means of persuasion." So anytime you need to persuade, what's going to do it for you? What are the levers which you can push or use to get someone to change their mind or act in the way that you want them to act? And he went further to say that there are actually 3 main routes into persuasion, 3 means or methods by which people were persuaded. And in Greek, he called these logos, pathos, and ethos. Now, logos sounds a lot like our English word logic, and it does refer to logical persuasion. And this is often what we think about when we talk about rhetoric. We think about arguments, we think about claims, facts, evidence, reasoning. This is all under the category of logos, this logical argumentation. And that's just one way to persuade. The second means of persuasion is pathos, or passionate, emotional persuasion. This is the ability to make your audience laugh, cry, hope, fear, or even burn with rage. To get these emotions flowing in your audience and move them to your ends. Rhetoricians use humor, analogies, pictures, videos, music, and above all, stories. In fact, there's a famous saying in rhetoric that to change a mind, you must first change a mood. And to change a mood, tell a story. Smart rhetoricians soon realize that logic is not enough to persuade someone. To get someone to really listen to you, you have to speak not just to their mind, but to their heart. And that leads us then to the third means of persuasion, ethos. Now, what's ethos? Logic, that's fairly straightforward. Pathos, that's not too hard once you get the flavor of it. Ethos is much trickier to understand. But Aristotle says that ethos is much more powerful in terms of persuasion than either logos or pathos. In fact, he claims that ethos is more powerful than logos and pathos combined. So, what is ethos? And how will it help you win those hard conversations? Well, ethos sometimes gets translated ethical persuasion, but I don't think that's a good translation. It's better translated as credibility or trustworthiness, the ability for an audience to put their faith or trust in the speaker. And that concept itself is somewhat accessible, but Aristotle goes further and distinguishes these three aspects of ethos that are vital to using that means of persuasion to move an audience. And I'd like to share these with you. He divided them into three parts with these weird-sounding Greek names. So hang with me. I'll explain what they mean. Ready? Phronesis, arete, and eunoia. All right? Let's start with phronesis. Phronesis meant practical wisdom. It meant, does the speaker have expertise and experience in whatever they are talking about? It's actually a little bit broader than that, too. Not only are they an expert and experienced in their subject area, are they an expert and experienced in human living as a whole? Do they have friends? Are they a good person? Are they kind? Do they know how to tie their shoes, brush their teeth and floss? All that kind of thing that makes up a functioning, helpful human being. So practical wisdom and experience and expertise, both in subject matter and in living as a human being. The famous example that Aristotle brought up with this was a philosopher who was living a generation before Aristotle taught, named Thales. Now, Thales had a lot of great ideas. No one would listen to him because he was poor. He didn't have a lot of money, and money meant a lot in the ancient Greek world, and they wouldn't give him the time of day because, in their eyes, he didn't have good enough phronesis, practical wisdom, expertise, and experience in the things that his audience cared about. So here's what he did. Thales went out and he used his knowledge of meteorology to predict a bumper crop in the region's olives coming up in the following season. And he rented out every single olive press in the entire city. And so when his prediction came true, and there was just olives upon olives for all those Greeks to make their olive oil out of, who did they have to come to press their olives into the olive oil? Thales. And so he made money hand over fist. And that wasn't the point for him. He gave away all the money, but he finally earned the respect of his fellow countrymen, and they would finally listen to him because he'd proven his phronesis, his practical wisdom. So that's the first aspect of having credibility and trustworthiness, phronesis. The second is arete. Arete is the Greek word for virtue, and it means having the appropriate moral excellence in the eyes of your audience. Do you share our values, is the question that every audience member is implicitly asking of a speaker. And if you think about who you are most persuaded by in your life, it's probably your best friends, your family members. Why is that? It's because they have incredibly high moral excellence in your eyes, and they share so many of your values. An example of somebody who would have a hard time persuading because he doesn't have very much arete would be Tom Brady. If you walked into a sports bar in Philadelphia tonight, he does not have very high arete in Philadelphia, right? He's not morally excellent in the eyes of Eagles fans. And so it would be hard for him to get a hearing and actually try to persuade somebody of anything in that city. So the question people ask with arete is, are you a good person, speaker? Should I trust you because you're a good person? The last element of ethos is eunoia, which means goodwill. Do you have the audience's best interest at heart, as you're speaking, or are you trying to get something out of them and it's clear? Are you trying to scam them? We often have pretty good detectors of if the person's speaking out of the best interest of the audience or just their own good interest. And the interesting thing about goodwill is that it's reciprocal. If you offer, as a speaker, goodwill to an audience, they will offer it back to you. And that's very important for persuasion. Costco knows this principle really, really well. My favorite part of Costco, maybe yours too, is not the amazing prices or the bulk volume of the goods you can buy. It's the samples, right? You're going through the aisles, and there's that little delicious morsel of whatever they're selling. And you might think that the reason they're handing out these samples is they want you to try before you buy. And that's a nice bonus. But Costco is savvier than that. They have done studies that have shown that stores that hand out samples make a significant more money, amount of money than stores that don't. And why is this? When you receive this little gift from the store, there's something inside of us that wants to make it square, that wants to give back. And so as a result, Costco and a number of other marketers and salesmen use this technique. You give something to get something. It's a fundamental principle of human psychology. And this is not being manipulative. This is simply working with how people operate. It's you give goodwill, and maybe you'll get goodwill back. So, the question for you, Noya, do you have my interest at heart, speaker, or not? Now, I'm guessing that despite these descriptions, these three concepts still might be a bit hazy. So I would like to give you guys a thought experiment with you, give that to you, and see if it helps a little bit. I would like to imagine with you that I have two speakers off stage here. They're going to come up, and they're going to try to give you a pitch, a crazy claim, which is that they have this brand new celery juice diet. If you try it, you'll drop 30 pounds in 15 days. All right? That's pretty wacky. I'm just saying that outright, okay? Pretty unbelievable. All right? Now, I want to imagine with you what it would look like for them to have radically different amounts of ethos as they try to make this claim. So here's the first individual. I'm going to welcome him up on stage. He looks like this. All right? Now, consider his phronesis, his level of expertise and experience. For expertise, he says that, well, he's watched a lot of daytime TV health shows. And he saw someone on Facebook just the other day recommending this diet, said it was amazing. For his experience with diet and dieting in general, he personally just absolutely loves celery, and he's thought about dieting one day, heard it's a good idea, and he just learned about this celery diet yesterday. He's very excited to have you try it, okay? That's his phronesis. For Arete, his level of moral excellence and shared values, he's just completely rude. As he's coming up on stage, there's a first grader there. He just shoves him out of the way. And the first thing out of his mouth is he makes a crass joke that's insulting to Trinity, all right? And then finally, his eunoia. He resorts to scare tactics in a high-pressure sales pitch to demand that each of us fork over $100 so that he'll share his secret recipe for you to make this diet drink. All right, so this guy. What could he say in terms of logos, in terms of logic and evidence, and what kind of stories would he have to tell to persuade you to try that diet? I'm guessing it would have to be pretty amazing evidence, pretty amazing stories, and even then, we'd be pretty unsure about the proposition, all right? So let's invite the second speaker on stage. This gentleman is a little bit different. For phronesis, for his experience and expertise, he has a medical degree from Johns Hopkins University and also a second doctorate, a PhD from Harvard in nutritional science, as well as 20 years of experience at UCLA's medical school. And he's published papers in many academic journals, including several papers on this particular diet and its health benefits. He has lots of experience seeing this diet work over several years with hundreds of patients at his clinic, and his own friends and family, they've tried it, and it's worked wonders for them. For his arete, for his moral excellence, he has a kind and calm demeanor. He's actually a Trinity parent. He's one of us, and he's friends with the Catos. Yeah. And then finally, for eunoia, for goodwill, he says, hey, check under your seats. I put a free booklet containing all the details that you need to know about this diet down there. The diet has no cost. You just got to buy the celery and a few standard ingredients. And actually, on the back of that booklet, I've listed a bunch of other diets that you might try that are also really excellent, because my goal for you is that you would live a healthy life. Now, how much more would this guy have to say? How much logic? How many stories? Very, very little, right? Ethos makes all the difference for persuasion. Let's return to Fred Rogers now. If we think back to his original talk, he was using all sorts of ethos techniques subtly under the surface to persuade Senator Pastore to not cut his funding. So for phronesis, for his expertise and experience, he just casually mentions that he's created hundreds of programs. He's worked for 15 years in the field of childhood television, and he personally does all the puppets, writes all the music, and writes all the scripts. For arete, his moral excellence, he says that he's constantly concerned about what children are seeing in America. And then for eunoia, he says that he gives an expression of care every day to each child, and that if his show can continue, it will offer a great service for mental health in America. Expert, phronesis, arete, and eunoia. Now, hopefully it's becoming clear why ethos is so powerful. Good ethos needs few arguments. Think about your best friend. They're a movie expert. They have impeccable taste in movies, and they suggest to you a new movie. They've never steered you wrong in the past. You're probably just gonna go see it, right? Say, Black Panther, it's amazing, it's gonna be at Edwards, just, buy your ticket now. Okay, you're there. No evidence needed. Think about a stranger yelling that same message to you in the street. Go see Black Panther, right? What? Or think about an enemy, right? I don't know if you have an enemy, I hope not, but what if your enemy said the same thing? Go see Black Panther. How much argument, how much evidence would it take? All right, so at this point, what I'd like to have persuaded you of is that ethos is incredibly powerful. Ethos is more powerful than logos and pathos. What I'd like to then turn to is how and why does ethos matter, and how will it help you win those hard conversations I've been talking to you about, the conversations that make you get all hot in your chest, that maybe dizzy your mind, that it's really hard to see through to a healthy conclusion. And the first thing that I'd like to do is I'd like to redefine with you what winning looks like rhetorically. We need to adjust our expectations for hard conversations. You will rarely win $10 million through your rhetoric, like Fred Rogers. Maybe that's self-explanatory. But you will also rarely ever change anybody's mind through one conversation. And here's the reason I know this. And if you think about it, you know it too. When was the last time that you changed your mind because of a conversation? Just think about it for a second. Can you think? When was it? It happens very, very rarely. We hold our beliefs very tightly. And to change your mind takes a lot of conversation, a lot of good thought. And there's also something else that's in the way, and it's called the backfire effect. When we feel bombarded by somebody's facts and reasons, it often makes us feel attacked. Studies show that in such cases, even when you have all the good arguments and all the good evidence, and you give these slam dunk reasons to somebody in a conversation, the person will not be persuaded. In fact, the opposite happens. In conversations where people feel like they have been stripped of all of their good evidence and arguments and been soundly beaten logically, they walk out holding their original belief much more strongly. In fact, one researcher said it this way: when your deepest convictions are challenged by contradictory evidence, your original beliefs get stronger. Studies have found that when people think that they are being attacked logically, when they think their beliefs are being attacked, it actually triggers the same part of their minds as the fight or fight syndrome, the fight or fight response, just as if they were being physically attacked. Now, that's not a mature response to hearing reasons that are contrary to what we believe, and developing good intellectual virtues, being increasingly open to hearing ideas that are contrary to your own and separating your ideas from your own identity. But that is a very common syndrome for almost all of us, this backfire effect. As a result, in order to overcome the backfire effect and have a shot at even communicating our ideas and maybe persuading, we need to start speaking to elephants. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, Jonathan Haidt, a social psychologist, studies the psychology of persuasion, especially in the most heated topics like religion and politics. And he argues, following a long tradition in Western philosophy, that the mind is divided into multiple parts. And he divides it into a rider and an elephant. Now, the rider, he describes as the conscious reasoning, the rational part of our minds. That part of our minds is slow, it's effortful, you have control over it, it likes to be analytical. But then there's the elephant on which the rider rides. And that part of the mind is intuitive, it's emotional, it's fast, sometimes even automatic. It makes decisions within seconds of a conversation starting. In most conversations, we speak most of the time trying to persuade each other's riders. We say, here are the 7 reasons why you are wrong. And we throw logic, unequipped, unaccompanied, at each other. And as a result, nothing happens to the elephant, and the rider doesn't move. Instead, we need to start speaking to each other's elephants. Because if you get the elephant to like you and like what you're saying, then it's effortless to persuade the rider to come along. But if the elephant doesn't want to come, there's nothing you can do to persuade the rider. And so, ethos allows us to speak to our audience members' elephants. Ethos is often unconscious. It's something that comes across and we're not even noticing it. But it moves beyond logic, beyond the rider, and speaks to this less conscious part of us and makes it possible, maybe, to move people in the directions we need them to go. Think about that Mr. Rogers example. If you like, you can very easily find it on YouTube. I'd encourage you to watch the whole thing and see Senator Pastore's elephant move. He starts off in this very antagonistic posture. And as Rogers speaks, and as he uses phronesis, arete, and eunoia, as he uses his ethos, as well as expert pathos and good logos, that elephant moves. And you can see his defensiveness melt into receptiveness. So to persuade, you must get your audience's elephant to trust you. You must have outstanding ethos. So then, the final question: how do we use ethos to win these hard conversations? Let me imagine with you 3 scenarios, 3 somewhat typical, perhaps, conversations that would often get heated without good rhetoric. All right, here's the first scenario. You're sitting at lunch tomorrow morning, or tomorrow noon at work, and that coworker from the opposite end of the political spectrum sits down at the table and wants to start badgering you into a debate about President Trump's latest policy proposal. How's that conversation gonna go? All right, second, it's later on tonight. You get home and your spouse brings up that budgeting disagreement that's been a sore point in your marriage for years. All right, how's that conversation gonna go? Or you're talking with your atheist friend over coffee and he asks you, how can you believe in God since science disproves Christianity? How's that conversation gonna go? By the way, if you have a friend like that, please invite them to come to next month's TrinityU, where Dr. Phillips we'll be giving a talk exactly on that issue about how science and Christianity relate together. All right, so what do we do? Here is my advice for you. Here are the take-home tips that I would like us to think about. First of all, stay calm. And remember, to win this conversation, you need to maintain and even boost your ethos, your phronesis, your arete, and your eunoia. Next, rhetoricians, communications experts, and psychologists all agree the best way to persuade is to postpone persuasion. Let me say that again. The best way to persuade is to postpone persuasion. Instead of persuasion, seek to understand your conversational partner first. What are they trying to tell you about what they believe that's so important to them? Remember, this conversation will almost never end in them conceding all your points and being persuaded by you. Winning in those hard conversations looks like reaching a deeper understanding of your partner's ideas and viewpoints and allowing them to understand your viewpoint too, and maybe being willing to have more conversations like this in the future. Often in rhetoric, winning is not the changing of minds, it's the meeting of minds, and have that as your goal. All right, the key skill here, as we try to understand the person in this hard conversation, is the art of listening. The art of listening. Now that sounds simple, and you guys are all very kindly exercising that art so much with me tonight. So I'm sure you all are experts, but for most people, listening well is harder than it sounds, and there's a number of obstacles to listening well, especially in a hard conversation where it's easier for us to feel under attack. So here are some obstacles to listening well I'd like you to think about. Number one is an over-assessment of our skill at listening. It's just like driving. When you poll drivers, everybody reports that they're an above-average driver, right? You all, I'm sure, are above-average drivers. And of course, that's statistically impossible. There are some people who are excellent drivers. There are some people who are very bad drivers. You probably dodged them on your way here tonight. Most of us are just average at driving. And it applies to listening as well. A study was done of managers who manage employees at different types of corporations, and these managers were asked to rate their own listening abilities. And as you might expect, none of them said that their skill at listening was very poor. None of them said poor even. They all said that their skill was above average or excellent. But then the same researchers asked those managers' employees, and you can imagine how the results came back. All right, none of the employees said that their manager was very good, and nearly all of them reported that their manager was weak at listening to them. So the question that I humbly ask you is, how good are you really at listening? In fact, maybe the better question is this: how would other people in your life describe you as a listener? All right, everybody has room to improve on this point, myself included. All right, so this is the first challenge, an overassessment of our listening skill. The second is prejudgment. When we start a hard conversation, we think we already know where everything is going. You've heard all these points before. Why should you listen? A famous phrase on this point goes, I cannot hear you because of what I expect you to say. And so as you listen in these conversations, remember, you are listening to gather information, but listening is also an act of love and respect for your conversational partner. Even if you really have heard these points before, you are acting out of deep empathy and love when you focus your full attention and mind on what they are saying. The third hurdle to overcome in order to listen well in these conversations is that we're quick to react in hard conversations, especially. Humans, one researcher said, are reaction machines. And when we start these conversations on tricky issues, our blood pressure goes up, we start feeling defensive, and it's hard for us to not want to interrupt and just get to our point as quickly as possible. So it's vital that you keep a cool composure and an open mind, even as you hear beliefs and ideas that you think are unfair, unfounded, or even as you feel personally attacked. If these are the hurdles to good listening, what should we do instead? How do we listen well? Well, first of all, there's a key difference in the way that you want to listen in these conversations. You need to listen not to evaluate, but to truly understand first. You're not filtering it through yes, no, bad idea, good idea, primarily. Primarily, you're simply listening to hear what they are saying to you. Os Guinness, a famous Christian writer, said, paradoxically, the first step in answering or responding to a person is to not have an answer. For the genuine answer counts only if we have genuinely listened first. So as we go on this process to listen well and to understand, we also need to cultivate a genuine desire to understand. When you are listening, it's really easy to fall into a unconscious, head nodding, yeah, when do I get to talk? When do I get to tear down that terrible idea you just said? And people can tell when we're faking it. We need to do our best to work within ourselves through different disciplines to really have this desire to hear from one another. Some more active things that we can be doing is asking clarifying questions when you have the chance. This shows your interlocutor, the person you're talking with, that you're really paying attention and that you have a desire to understand their point of view. And something doesn't quite make sense to you, but you want it to make sense. So you're having this conversation with someone from a very different viewpoint, and they've accused you of being intolerant. So you say, when you say I'm intolerant, in your viewpoint, what do you mean by intolerant? Help me understand you better. Ask those clarifying questions. Finally, a really helpful tool is summary statements. When you get to the end of what they want to tell you and you've listened well, try to sum it all up. So what I hear you saying is, in fact, in the medieval university, they would have these debates between people from different viewpoints. And they had this wonderful practice I think we should bring back into the 21st century, which was the first person in the debate gave their point of view, marshal all their evidence, give all their arguments, and then it'd be time for the second person. The second person in a medieval debate was not allowed to advance any of their own opinions. They were not even allowed to refute any of the opinions that they had heard until they'd summarized the first debater's viewpoints to the satisfaction of the first debater. So when we summarize, when we say, this is what I hear you saying, is that right? Have I got you right? Again, it shows we're there to understand. We truly want to meet them and understand their viewpoint. All right, so hopping back out, how do you win using Ethos? Stay calm. Seek first to understand by listening well. And the third point is postpone persuasion one more moment and first find common ground. We're trained in school, in college, when we hear an argument to pinpoint what's wrong with it. And that's where we're going to dive in. When we're using Ethos to persuade, you need to flip that. The first thing you should look for is not what's wrong, what's right. What am I hearing that I agree with that is just 100% correct? We need to find the facts and values and concerns that we can agree upon. And sometimes that's hard to do. And so what you need to do is take a broader step out to find common values. So maybe you're having this heated debate, and the subject matter, you just couldn't be further from the person you're talking with. But often if you take a broader look out, you can find things that you share. So think about politics. You're talking with somebody from the opposite end of the political spectrum. You might pause and say, look, we both care about America's future, and we both want our children to grow up in a stronger, safer, fairer country. And so our conversation is about what's the best way to do this, but I acknowledge that about you. Or when you're talking with your spouse about that money issue, honey, we both care about making our family financially sound and spending money wisely. We share these values together. Or with your atheist friend, we both agree that science is such a wonderful pathway to knowledge about the physical universe. And I'm a huge fan of science. Right? Finding these areas of shared value are so important, these bridges that we can build so that the next phase of the conversation can happen. If you follow these steps, we get to the last important technique before persuasion begins. And this is, the ancient Romans called this Concessio. My students like to call it rhetorical jujitsu. All right. And here's why. If you know anything about jujitsu, a lot of the fundamental principles is if you're being attacked by somebody, you don't attack back. Instead, you take their momentum and you get them off balance. You use their attacking momentum and you shift them to the floor, and then you do some sort of crazy chokehold, right, and knock them out, armbar, whatever. All right. The same principle applies in rhetoric, though hopefully much less combative, right? When we start a conversation, most people's guard is up. They're ready for a fight. Concessio says, through finding common ground, through agreeing, through saying, look, here are all the things that you're saying that I couldn't agree more with. You're just so right about this, this, and this, and this. The arms go down. People become less defensive. They become open to hearing what you have to say. All right, if you follow this method, this will increase your ethos, your credibility and trustworthiness with your audience. You'll have boosted your phronesis by showing that you're a wise person who's not threatened by opposing ideas. And by the way, if you know a conversation like this is coming up, you should absolutely do your homework, right? Find all the good arguments, read all the best books. You might not personally have lots of expertise in the subject that you're talking about, like science and religion. Well, find an expert that does. Come hear Dr. Phillips, read a book about it, and have that ready when the time comes to bring that out. This method will also allow you to have amazing arete. You'll be staying calm and listening, and that demonstrates humility and shows that you share the values with the person you're talking with. And finally, it'll demonstrate eunoia. Listening is a huge way to show respect and goodwill for your audience member, and hopefully they'll reciprocate. This method will allow you to speak to your coworker's elephant, your spouse's elephant, your friend's elephant, and perhaps even lead it to the place where you want that elephant to go. So tonight, I've been explaining that that rhetoric is the art of persuasion and how maintaining high ethos is vital to winning these hard conversations we've been talking about. To conclude, I'd like to return to a point I made earlier on, that rhetoric is not only the art of persuasion, it's the art of leadership. Because you cannot lead if you cannot persuade. And Christian classical education is, in many ways, all about training good leaders. It's about teaching students to see truth, to love beauty, and to persuade others to follow them in seeking goodness. And more than ever, our churches, our cities, our nation, they're all crying out for leadership. We're desperately in need of good leaders in fields like politics, in business, in science, in education, in art, and entertainment. The great Roman orator and senator Cicero lived during a time of great political turmoil and upheaval for the Roman Republic, a time in which good leaders were hard to find. In his book on politics, Cicero wrote, "If the good people refuse to lead, the wicked or unwise will." It's my privilege to train up good young men and women to lead through the art of rhetoric here at Trinity. And it's been my privilege to share some ideas about rhetoric, Aristotle, and ethos with you all tonight. Thank you.